Let's jump right in because the source material we're unpacking today starts with an absolute gut punch of a warning. Look, if a ministry or even the church you attend relies solely on tax-deductible donations to survive the fracturing economy we're heading into by 2026, they are running out of time. The global landscape is shifting way too fast beneath our feet, and the traditional, comfortable ways of funding the spread of the gospel are becoming critically endangered.
Right out of the gate, this explainer demands a massive paradigm shift. It poses a really uncomfortable question, one that creates some serious tension. Is the modern church's funding model actually unbiblical? I mean, think about it. Nowhere in the Bible is a 501c3 tax exemption status equated with holiness. No way. Yet modern Western ministry is basically built on the assumption that if it's not a nonprofit, it's somehow not really doing God's work.
The urgency here really stems from hard data. We're talking recent reports out of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, right alongside Lazard's 2026 geopolitical analysis. Their conclusion? Global fragmentation is accelerating, and fast. We are staring down fractured supply chains, looming conflicts, and intense economic nationalism. And for the local church, this macro-level instability breeds a very real micro-level crisis, deep congregational anxiety, and, frankly, extreme financial fragility.
Look at the contrast presented here. It is stark. The old model is dependent, it's fragile, it's slow, and it relies entirely on people dropping money in a plate. But the new model, that is sovereign, anti-fragile, agile, and high yield. This forces a sharp, defining question for all of us. Are we just managing the decline of the church, or are we actively funding its expansion? Because let's be honest, you simply cannot fund exponential expansion using a fragile, slow model.
Just look at this data. We are seeing the steady, undeniable decline of traditional religious donations juxtaposed right against the absolute exponential rise of global digital content consumption. The analysis points out a really dangerous reality. Secular algorithms are scaling lies globally, literally in seconds, using massive concentrated capital. Meanwhile, the church remains dangerously satisfied with local whispers funded by bake sales. Guys, it's like bringing a bucket to a cyber war.
Which brings us to part one of our breakdown, the disruption, and specifically the fragility of donations. To really grasp this disruption, the author asks a boardroom-level question: what happens if your funding goes bankrupt tomorrow? What happens if the tax codes change, making donations to conservative Christian causes legally untenable? Look, if a mission relies on the cultural approval of the IRS, it is fundamentally fragile. Now, to be crystal clear, the text affirms that God is absolutely sovereign. Psalm 46 reminds us, God is our refuge, though the earth gives way. Geopolitical shaking is going to happen, but God remains on the throne. However, and this is a critical distinction, trusting in God's sovereignty does not excuse human incompetence. Relying on fragile cultural approval for mission funding in a hostile world, that's just a strategic disaster.
This leads perfectly into the distinction between therapeutic moralism and biblical infrastructure. When the world starts shaking, a lot of people retreat into therapeutic moralism, right? Just offering shallow positive thinking to make everybody feel a little better. But the argument here is that what's actually required right now is biblical infrastructure. We don't need platitudes. We need to build heavy artillery supply chains for the local church. Resources, theology, and digital engines that can withstand absolute chaos. So, how do we do that? Let's move to part two, the revelation of the biblical profit engine. To build this kind of infrastructure, the framework actually points us back to Acts 18:3, outlining what it calls Paul's tentmaker V2 strategy. Now think about this. The Apostle Paul didn't make tents because he liked camping, right? He did it for strategic financial sovereignty. He went out and generated an independent revenue stream so that no local magistrate, no Roman governor, and no wealthy patron could ever control or censor his sermons. It was pure autonomy for the sake of the gospel.
And the source takes this even further with a highly provocative reading of Matthew 25. The core mechanics of venture capital, taking a calculated risk for exponential multiplication, are actually found right here in Jesus Christ's parable of the talents. The master literally rebukes the servant who just buried the resource to keep it safe. The thesis here is undeniable. God demands a return on kingdom investments. Maintaining the status quo is condemned, multiplication is commanded.
It's kind of like the difference between a bucket and an aqueduct. Nonprofit fundraising? That's a bucket. You carry it to the well, you fill it up, you empty it out, and then you have to walk all the way back. It is exhausting. But a for-profit digital engine? That is an aqueduct. Sure, it takes massive capital, serious engineering, and heavy lifting up front. But once it's built, the water just flows continuously, it funds the mission forever.
Let's look at exactly how we use this in Part 3, Weaponizing Digital Revenue Streams.
The source provides a very specific real-world blueprint for how to actually weaponize this revenue. Here's how it works. Step 1. Freestyle Media Productions, or FMP, operates as a for-profit LLC generating sovereign revenue. Step 2. That corporate structure acts as an explicit shield for Sermon Academy, making it virtually uncancelable by external cultural or financial coercion. Then, Step 3. Sermon Academy uses those resources to freely equip pastors globally with high-level expository Bible study tools. The business engine protects and fuels the ministry engine. And the ultimate why behind this entire engine is rooted in 2 Timothy 3:16-17. It reminds us that all Scripture is breathed out by God, so that the man of God may be complete. This entire financial and digital architecture exists for one solitary reason: distributing the absolute sufficiency and authority of the God-breathed Scriptures to a world that is literally starving for truth. The whole shebang is about the unhindered proclamation of the Word.
Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Let's hit Part 4, Dismantling the Greed Objection.
I get it. You're probably sitting there thinking, this sounds exactly like a secular startup bro trying to extract wealth from believers. The text anticipates that and violently separates this model from the prosperity gospel. Let's be clear, prosperity theology is a heresy that hoards wealth for personal comfort. But as the author brilliantly notes, while the prosperity gospel is a heresy, the poverty gospel is a strategic disaster. What we're talking about here is biblical stewardship. It's generating wealth not to hoard it, but to deploy it as heavy artillery for the global mission of Christ.
And regarding your local congregation, this framework has a strict, uncompromising rule. Keep your tithe in your local church, period. This digital engine does not want your tithe. That belongs to the local storehouse. The for-profit engine is specifically designed to come alongside the local church, providing world-class resources so your pastor doesn't have to bankrupt the church's budget just trying to compete with secular media conglomerates.
There are very clear guardrails keeping this model deeply, deeply biblical. 1. Reject the prosperity gospel entirely. 2. Radically affirm the local church. 3. Always, always elevate the mission over the margin. And 4. Maximize the yield specifically for the mission. The argument being made is a hard truth. For far too long, the church has confused financial incompetence with spiritual piety. Being broke doesn't make a ministry holy. It just makes it totally ineffective when the culture wars heat up.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Building Resilient Kingdom Infrastructure.
When the 2026 global trends of economic fragmentation really hit, a nice sermon series just isn't going to cut it. Infrastructure is required, and the proof of concept points directly to Sermon Academy. We're talking over 185 deep, expository teachings reaching believers across 97 countries with thousands of hours of content consumed. It proves that a sovereign, for-profit engine absolutely can successfully fuel uncompromising gospel truth globally without constantly begging for donations or relying on a fragile tax code. Look, trusting God requires action. Praying for rain means you better start digging ditches.
Proverbs 13:22 says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." The text offers a really hard truth to believers here. We love to say that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and He absolutely does. But guess what? He expects you to manage the ranch. He expects the building of multi-generational, anti-fragile systems that will fund the spread of the gospel long, long after we are gone. So the source material leaves us with an incredibly powerful challenge regarding our lives, our investments, and our ministries. Are you building a kingdom, or are you just maintaining a museum? The world is shaking, guys, and the time for fragile, dependent funding models is officially ending. If you agree it's time to completely rethink this reliance on cultural tax codes, drop a comment below and let us know. Subscribe for more explainers and join us in building the resilient, sovereign kingdom infrastructure that the future demands.